The notification on my phone showed a 7-digit number I didn't recognize. But when I answered, the shrill voice on the other end made my stomach drop before she even finished her first sentence. "Mr. Patterson, this is Deborah Whitmore from the Pinecrest Hills Homeowners Association, and I'm calling to inform you that we'll be dispatching our maintenance crew to your property this afternoon to remove the internet cable running along the exterior of your home." I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it like it had just started speaking Mandarin. "I'm sorry, what?" "The cable," Deborah repeated, her tone suggesting I was dense for not understanding immediately. "The black one running from the utility pole to your house. It's been cited as a violation of our aesthetic guidelines, Section 12, Paragraph 4. We've sent you 3 notices." I walked to my front window, looking out at my modest 2-story home in Pinecrest Hills, Colorado. The neighborhood sat just outside Denver, a planned community built 10 years ago with strict HOA rules that I'd foolishly ignored when buying the place. The internet line she was talking about was the main fiber connection that Comcast had installed when I moved in 3 years ago. It ran from the pole at the street, across about 30 feet of air, and connected to my house just below the roofline. "That's my internet connection," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I need that for work. I work from home." "Then you should have ensured it was installed according to community standards," Deborah replied. "The cable should have been buried underground or run through existing conduit. Having it exposed like that creates an eyesore for the entire neighborhood." "An eyesore?" "It's a black cable that blends in with everything. You can barely see it. Mr. Patterson, I've personally observed the cable on 3 separate occasions during my neighborhood inspections. It's quite visible and detracts from our community's carefully maintained appearance. The crew will be there at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Please ensure someone is home to provide access to your property if needed." "Wait, you can't just cut my internet. I run critical infrastructure from here. The emergency alert system for the entire neighborhood goes through my setup." There was a pause. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Of course she didn't. I'd been maintaining the Pinecrest Hills emergency alert system for 2 years, ever since the county installed it. The system was designed to send out emergency notifications to all residents via text, email, and the neighborhood's outdoor warning speakers during severe weather, missing persons cases, or other urgent situations. The county had asked for a volunteer with technical experience who worked from home and could respond quickly. I jumped at the chance, seeing it as a way to contribute to the community. The setup ran through my home internet connection, backed up by a cellular connection that was painfully slow and only meant for absolute emergencies. The main system required constant monitoring and the high-speed connection to push out alerts to over 300 households simultaneously. "The emergency alert system," I repeated slowly. "The one that warned everyone about the tornado last spring. The missing child alert in July. Those go through my house, through that internet connection you're planning to cut." "Well, that's certainly unfortunate timing," Deborah said, and I could practically hear her dismissive shrug through the phone. "But you've had ample opportunity to address this violation. Perhaps you should have considered the importance of your internet connection before allowing such an unsightly installation. I'm sure you can make alternative arrangements." "Alternative arrangements?" "Deborah, it took Comcast 3 weeks to install that line the first time. You can't just cut it and expect it to be fixed overnight." "That sounds like a personal problem, Mr. Patterson. The violation has been documented, you've been notified, and the board has voted to have it removed." If you want internet service, I suggest you contact your provider and have them install it correctly this time, according to our guidelines. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, processing what had just happened. I pulled up my email and searched for anything from the HOA. Nothing. I checked my spam folder, still nothing. 3 notices she'd claimed, but I'd never seen a single one. I called Deborah back. It went to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. On the 3rd try, I left a message explaining that I'd never received any notices and requesting we discuss this before any action was taken. Then I called the county emergency management office. "Emergency management, this is Rita speaking." "Rita, this is Sam Patterson over in Pinecrest Hills. I maintain the emergency alert system terminal here, and we have a situation." I explained what was happening while Rita listened in increasingly concerned silence. When I finished, she let out a long breath. "Sam, you're telling me they're going to cut the line this afternoon? As in today?" "That's what she said. 3 o'clock. "Okay, let me get my supervisor. Don't hang up." I waited, watching the clock. It was already noon. 3 hours. I used the time to fire up my computer and pull up the HOA guidelines she'd mentioned. Section 12. Paragraph 4 did indeed reference external cabling, but the language was vague. It talked about minimizing visual impact and maintaining aesthetic harmony, but it didn't explicitly prohibit aerial cable runs. More importantly, there was an exception clause for essential services and utilities. Rita came back on the line with her supervisor, a man named Carl Johnson, who sounded like he'd been dealing with bureaucratic nonsense for about 30 years too long. "Mr. Patterson," Carl said, "I'm looking at our agreement with Pinecrest Hills right now. The HOA signed off on your property as the system hub location. They were aware of the technical requirements, including the high-speed internet connection. Do you have documentation of that?" "I should." "Let me pull it up." I navigated through my files until I found the original agreement from 2 years ago. "Yes, it's here. Signed by the HOA president at the time, a Roger Feldman. Feldman's not the president anymore. No, there was an election last year. Deborah Whitmore won. She's been making a lot of changes." Carl made a noise that might have been a growl. "Of course she has. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call Miss Whitmore directly and explain that cutting that line would be interfering with county emergency infrastructure. That's not just a HOA violation we're talking about. That's potentially a criminal matter if it impacts public safety. Will that stop her?" "It should. If it doesn't, call me back immediately. In the meantime, document everything. Take pictures of the current setup, save any communications from the HOA, and for God's sake, don't let them cut that line." "Understood. Thanks, Carl." I hung up and immediately started taking pictures. The cable itself, the connection point on my house, the pole at the street, the equipment inside my home office that managed the alert system. I photographed everything from multiple angles, making sure to get timestamps on each image. At 1:30, I received a text from an unknown number. "HOA maintenance crew en route to your property. Please ensure access to backyard and exterior walls. Pinecrest Hills HOA." I texted back. "Do not cut any utility lines. County emergency management has been notified and objects to this action." No response. At 2:45, a white pickup truck with Pinecrest Hills maintenance stenciled on the door pulled up to my curb. 2 men got out, both wearing jeans and high-visibility vests. One carried a ladder, the other had a tool bag. I walked outside before they made it to my property line. "Gentlemen," I called out, "I need you to hold on a second." The older of the 2 men, heavyset with a graying beard, nodded. "You Mr. Patterson?" "I am." Look, I know you're just doing your job, but that cable you're here to remove is part of the county emergency alert system. Cutting it would interfere with public safety infrastructure. I've been in contact with county emergency management, and they've reached out to the HOA to stop this. The two men exchanged glances. The younger one, maybe mid-20s with sun-bleached hair, shrugged. We just got the work order this morning. Says remove the cable. That's what we were told to do. I understand, but this is bigger than a work order. If you cut that line and there's an emergency that we can't alert people about because of it, you could be held liable. The older man pulled out his phone and made a call. Hey, boss, we're at the Patterson property on Elmwood Drive. He's saying something about county emergency systems and liability. Want to talk to him? He handed me the phone. A gruff voice came through. This is Dennis Morton, maintenance supervisor. What's this about emergency systems? I explained the situation again, emphasizing Carl's warning about criminal implications. Dennis listened without interrupting, then said, "Hold on." The line went quiet except for muffled conversation. After what felt like 5 minutes but was probably closer to 2, Dennis came back. I just got off the phone with Deborah. She says to proceed with the removal. She claims the county has no authority over HOA enforcement of community guidelines. That's insane. The system serves the entire community. It's not just my personal internet connection. Look, man, I hear you, but I work for the HOA. She's telling me to do this, so unless you can get her on the phone right now telling me otherwise, my guys have to follow orders. Give me 5 minutes. Please, just give me 5 minutes to get county emergency management on the line with Deborah. Dennis sighed. 5 minutes. After that, we're doing the job. I called Carl back, but it went to voicemail. I tried Rita. Also voicemail. I tried the main emergency management number and got a receptionist who informed me that both Carl and Rita were in a meeting and couldn't be disturbed. This is urgent, I insisted. The HOA is actively trying to cut the emergency alert system's internet connection right now. As in, right this second at my house. Sir, I can take a message, but I can't interrupt their meeting unless it's an active emergency. This is an active emergency. If they cut this line and a tornado warning comes through tonight, hundreds of people won't get the alert. I understand your concern, but a potential future emergency isn't the same as an active emergency. I'll make sure they get your message as soon as possible. I wanted to throw my phone. Instead, I walked back outside where the 3 men were waiting. I couldn't reach them. They're in a meeting. Dennis took his phone back. Sorry, man, we have to do the job. Then I'm filming everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording. For the record, I am Sam Patterson, and I maintain the Pinecrest Hills emergency alert system at this location. This system serves over 300 households and is part of the county emergency management infrastructure. I have explicitly objected to the cutting of this internet line, and county emergency management has been notified. Any action taken here is against my wishes and potentially endangers public safety. The older maintenance worker looked uncomfortable, but he set up his ladder anyway. I kept filming as he climbed up, wire cutters in hand. The younger guy steadied the ladder, glancing at my camera every few seconds like he expected it to explode. Last chance, I called up. Don't do this. Just following orders, the older man said, and with a quick snip, he cut through the fiber optic cable. The line dropped, swinging down to hang limply from the utility pole. My internet, and with it the emergency alert system's primary connection, was gone. I stopped recording, feeling a cold knot of anger in my gut. I need you to know, I said to the 3 men, that when this becomes a problem, and it will, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who was responsible and who gave the order. Dennis just nodded tiredly. Yeah, well, that's above my pay grade. You want to complain, take it up with Deborah. He gestured to his crew. Come on, guys, let's go. They packed up and left. I stood in my front yard, staring at the severed cable hanging from the pole, and called Carl again. This time he answered. Sam, I just got your messages. Tell me they didn't actually cut it. They cut it. About 2 minutes ago, I have it on video. Carl swore, a creative string of profanity that would have impressed a sailor. And you told them about the county system, multiple times. They said Deborah Whitmore insisted they proceed despite the objections. Said she claims the county has no authority over HOA guidelines. She's wrong. She's very, very wrong. Okay, I'm calling the county attorney's office right now. In the meantime, switch the system over to the backup cellular connection and pray we don't get any severe weather in the next few days. I went inside and did exactly that, watching my monitoring software switch from the high-speed fiber connection to the sluggish cellular backup. The system was functional, technically, but it would be slow. If I needed to send out an alert to all 300-plus households simultaneously, the cellular connection would choke. People would get their notifications late, if at all. The rest of the afternoon crawled by in a haze of angry phone calls and documentation. I emailed Carl all of my video footage and photographs. I called Comcast to schedule a reinstallation, only to be told that running a new aerial line would take a minimum of 2 weeks, and that's if they could get HOA approval for the installation. If I wanted it buried, as Deborah had suggested, the timeline stretched to 6 weeks and would cost me an additional $3,000 for the trenching work that would need to be coordinated with the HOA. And what if the HOA refuses to approve any installation? I asked the Comcast rep. Then you'd be without service until the matter is resolved, sir. We can't install on private property or HOA-controlled areas without proper approval. Perfect. Just perfect. Around 6 o'clock my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s standing on my porch, her blonde hair styled in a severe bob, wearing a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Deborah Whitmore in the flesh. Mr. Patterson, she said, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought it would be appropriate for us to have a face-to-face conversation about today's events. You mean the events where you cut my internet connection, despite being told it was part of the county emergency alert system? Her smile tightened. May I come in? I wanted to say no, wanted to slam the door in her face, but I needed to know what was going through her head. I stepped aside and let her in, leading her to my living room. She sat on my couch like she owned the place, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. Mr. Patterson, I understand you're upset, she began, but you need to understand that my primary responsibility is to maintain property values and community standards in Pinecrest Hills. That's what every homeowner here pays their HOA fees for. When I see violations, it's my duty to address them, even when addressing them creates a public safety risk. I don't believe there is a public safety risk. You're being dramatic. The county emergency management system existed before your personal setup, and it will continue to exist after. They can send alerts through the county-wide system. They don't need your house as some kind of special hub. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. Deborah, the county-wide system is different from the neighborhood system. The whole point of having a local hub is faster, more targeted alerts. If there's a tornado warning specifically for our area, the neighborhood system can alert everyone within minutes. The county-wide system is slower and less precise. That sounds like the county's problem, not the HOA's problem. You should have consulted with the board before agreeing to host any county equipment. The previous board approved it. Roger Feldman signed off on everything. Deborah waved her hand dismissively. Roger was too lenient. He let people get away with all sorts of violations. Since I took over, I've been working systematically to bring every property into compliance. We've addressed illegal paint colors, unauthorized landscaping, improperly stored garbage cans, and now, unsightly cables. Your property is just one of many that needed correction. My property is different because it serves the entire community. Your property is different because you think you're special, Deborah shot back, some heat entering her voice. Do you know how many homeowners I've dealt with who think their personal situation warrants an exception? Everyone has an excuse. Everyone thinks their violation is somehow acceptable because of their unique circumstances. If I make an exception for you, I have to make exceptions for everyone, and then we have no standards at all. There's an exception clause in Section 12 for essential services. Internet is not an essential service, Mr. Patterson. It's a luxury, a convenience. Yes, you may work from home, but that's a choice you made. The HOA is not obligated to accommodate every lifestyle choice our residents make. I stared at her, genuinely amazed. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about my job or my convenience. This is about emergency notifications for 300 families. And I'm sure the county will figure out an alternative solution. That's not my problem. My problem is maintaining the visual standards of this community, and I intend to do exactly that. She stood up. Now, if you want to have internet service, I suggest you work with your provider to have the line installed underground and out of sight, per the guidelines. If you submit a proper installation plan to the board for approval, we'll review it at our next meeting. When is the next meeting? 3 weeks from Tuesday. 3 weeks. Deborah, I need internet now. For work, for the emergency system, for everything. You should have thought of that before violating community guidelines. She walked toward the front door and I followed, speechless. At the threshold, she turned back. Oh, and you'll be receiving a fine for the cable violation. $200 plus $50 for each day it remains unaddressed, as per our enforcement policy. I suggest you have Comcast remove the remaining cable from the utility pole promptly. Good evening, Mr. Patterson. She left, and I closed the door, leaning against it and trying to process the conversation. She was insane. She had to be. No reasonable person would cut emergency infrastructure over an aesthetic complaint. I called Carl again, filled him in on Deborah's visit, and listened to him swear even more creatively than before. The county attorney is drafting a letter, Carl said when he'd calmed down. We're also considering seeking a temporary restraining order to force the HOA to allow reinstallation of your internet line. But Sam, these things take time. We're talking days at minimum, maybe weeks. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? Keep the system running on the backup connection and pray. That's all we can do. I'm sorry, Sam. This is completely insane, but we're dealing with bureaucracy on both sides now. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking my monitoring software, watching the cellular connection stay barely functional, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. What if there was a tornado? What if another child went missing? What if there was a gas leak, or a chemical spill, or any of the dozen other emergencies the system was designed to handle? The next morning, I woke to an email from the HOA legal team, informing me that I was now in violation of 2 separate community guidelines. The original cable violation, and a new one about leaving damaged infrastructure on HOA property, referring to the cut cable still hanging from the utility pole. The fines were accumulating. $200 for the original violation, another $200 for the new violation, and $50 per day for each until both were resolved. I forwarded everything to Carl and tried to start my workday. I'm a software developer for a healthcare company, and I needed internet for everything. The cellular backup was painfully slow, timing out on video calls and taking forever to upload my code changes. I burned through most of my cellular data in the first 3 hours, and my wireless provider's throttling kicked in, making things even worse. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification from the neighborhood alert system. Severe thunderstorm warning, issued by the National Weather Service for Adams County, including Pinecrest Hills. Potential for large hail and damaging winds. The county was activating the emergency alert system. I watched my monitoring software light up as it attempted to push the alert out through the cellular connection. The progress bar crawled. 10 households notified. 20. 30. The texts were going out, but slowly, far too slowly. On the main fiber connection, all 300 households would have been notified in under 2 minutes. On cellular, it was taking nearly a minute per household, and the connection kept dropping and having to retry. By the time the alert reached 100 households, the first hail started hitting my roof. By the time it reached 200, I could hear the wind howling. The final 100 households got their alerts after the storm had already hit, making the warnings essentially useless. I documented everything, screenshot after screenshot of the slow notification times and dropped connections. When the storm passed 20 minutes later, having knocked down tree branches and dented cars with golf ball-sized hail throughout the neighborhood, I had a damning record of exactly how the HOA's decision had endangered people. Carl called me before I could call him. "I saw the notification times, Sam. That's unacceptable." "I know. I have documentation of everything. People got their warnings late or not at all because of the cellular connection limitations. The county attorney is escalating this. We're going to seek an emergency court order today. I need you to send me all of your documentation, everything showing the system performance before and after the line was cut, plus any communications with the HOA." I spent the next hour compiling everything into a comprehensive package and sending it off. Then I posted in the Pinecrest Hills community Facebook group, explaining what had happened and why many residents had received their storm warning late. The response was immediate and explosive. "My kids were outside playing when the hail started because we didn't get the warning in time," one mother posted. "I was driving home from work. I could have pulled over and waited out the storm if I'd known it was coming," another resident added. "Why would the HOA cut our emergency alert system? That's insane," a third chimed in. Within an hour, the post had over 100 comments, nearly all of them angry, many demanding Deborah's resignation. A few defenders appeared, claiming that property values and community standards had to be maintained, but they were quickly shouted down. Deborah herself eventually commented, "Mr. Patterson had ample opportunity to ensure his personal internet connection complied with community guidelines. The HOA cannot be held responsible for his failure to do so. Furthermore, emergency alerts are the responsibility of county emergency management, not individual homeowners. Any issues with alert timing should be directed to the county, not the HOA." The comments section exploded. I watched, fascinated, as my neighbors tore into her with justified fury. Someone created a petition calling for an emergency HOA meeting to recall Deborah from her position as president. Within 2 hours, it had over 100 signatures, more than the required threshold to force a meeting. That evening, a news van pulled up to my house. A reporter from a Denver TV station had apparently seen the Facebook drama and smelled a story. I gave them an interview, explaining the situation on camera while standing in front of my house with the severed cable visible in the background. The reporter, a sharp woman named Jennifer Cole, asked all the right questions. "So the HOA cut your internet line, knowing it was part of the emergency alert system?" "That's correct. I informed them multiple times, including the maintenance crew, while they were actually cutting the line. I have video documentation. And this resulted in delayed emergency alerts during today's severe thunderstorm. Yes, under normal circumstances, all residents would have been notified within 2 minutes. Today, it took over 20 minutes, and many people received their warnings after the storm had already hit." "What has the HOA said about this?" I pulled out my phone and read Deborah's Facebook comment. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "She's claiming the emergency alerts aren't the homeowner's responsibility. Technically, she's correct that the county manages the system, but they specifically asked me to host the neighborhood hub because of my technical background and home office setup. The HOA approved this arrangement 2 years ago under the previous board president. And the current HOA president wasn't willing to honor that arrangement. She told me that internet is a luxury, not an essential service, and that the aesthetic concerns outweighed any emergency management considerations." Jennifer looked at the camera. "We reached out to the Pinecrest Hills HOA for comment. HOA President Deborah Whitmore declined to be interviewed, but provided a written statement saying that all enforcement actions were conducted in accordance with community guidelines and that the HOA is not responsible for county emergency management systems." She turned back to me. "What happens now?" "I've filed complaints with the county attorney's office, and the county emergency management department is seeking a court order to force the HOA to allow reinstallation of my internet connection. In the meantime, the emergency alert system is operating on a backup cellular connection that's inadequate for the task." The interview aired on the 10 o'clock news. My phone started ringing immediately afterward, first with calls from neighbors expressing support, then from other news outlets wanting their own interviews. I did 3 more that night, each time emphasizing the public safety implications of the HOA's actions. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA's legal team threatening me with a lawsuit for defamation and interfering with HOA operations. They claimed my public statements were false and misleading, and that I was deliberately stirring up trouble to avoid compliance with community guidelines. I forwarded it to Carl, who called me laughing. "They're threatening to sue you for telling the truth. That's beautiful. Please, please let them try." The county attorney would love to depose Deborah under oath about why she thought cutting emergency infrastructure was a good idea. So I should ignore this? Absolutely. It's a scare tactic. They have no case and they know it. Just keep documenting everything and let us handle the legal side. That afternoon, the county filed their emergency motion in district court. I received a copy of the filing, a 12-page document laying out the situation in precise legal language and arguing that the HOA's actions constituted interference with county emergency operations, created a public safety hazard, and violated the original agreement allowing the system to be hosted at my property. The county was asking the court to order the HOA to immediately allow reinstallation of my internet connection, to prohibit any further interference with the emergency alert system, and to award attorneys' fees and costs. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later, which in court terms was lightning fast. Apparently, the judge took emergency management seriously. Those 3 days were tense. I continued working on my barely functional cellular connection, watching the alert system limp along. 2 more weather alerts came through, both of them transmitted far too slowly. Thankfully, neither involved severe conditions, just routine thunderstorm warnings that didn't materialize into anything dangerous. The neighborhood Facebook group remained on fire. The petition to recall Deborah had over 200 signatures now, and residents were organizing. Someone discovered that, according to the HOA bylaws, a recall vote could be triggered by a petition signed by 30% of homeowners. Pinecrest Hills had 312 households, meaning they needed 94 signatures. They had well over that and were still collecting more. Deborah posted another comment trying to defend her position. I understand that emotions are running high, but we must remember that property values benefit everyone. A neighborhood with strict standards maintains its value better than one where anything goes. The cable violation was clear, and enforcement was appropriate. Mr. Patterson's decision to host county equipment without ensuring proper installation is not the HOA's responsibility to fix. The comment received over 300 angry reactions and 100 replies, none of them supportive. Even the people who had initially defended her were backing off. Property values were important, sure, but not at the expense of emergency notifications. The day of the court hearing, I put on my best suit and drove to the courthouse in downtown Denver. Carl met me outside along with an assistant county attorney named Michelle Rodriguez who would be handling the argument. She was younger than I expected, maybe 30, but she exuded confidence. "Don't worry," she told me as we walked in. "We have an airtight case." The HOA violated their own agreement, interfered with county operations, and created a demonstrable public safety hazard. Unless the judge is completely incompetent, we'll get the order. Inside the courtroom, Deborah sat on the opposite side with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. She saw me and her expression hardened into something cold and brittle. We didn't speak. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Sandra Kowalski, called the case and listened to both sides. Michelle presented our argument clearly and forcefully, walking through the timeline of events, the documentation of delayed alerts during the thunderstorm, and the original agreement that the HOA had signed off on. The HOA's attorney, a slick man named Bradley Hunt, argued that the HOA had the right to enforce their guidelines, that the emergency alert system was the county's responsibility to maintain, and that any agreement made by the previous board wasn't binding on the current board if it violated existing community guidelines. Judge Kowalski interrupted him. "Counsel, are you seriously arguing that the HOA can unilaterally cancel an agreement with the county because the board membership changed? Your Honor, the agreement was inconsistent with the HOA's governing documents. The current board has the authority to enforce those documents. And did the current board make any attempt to negotiate an alternative solution with the county before cutting the internet line?" Bradley hesitated. "The HOA sent multiple notices to Mr. Patterson regarding the violation." "That's not what I asked. Did the HOA contact county emergency management to discuss the issue before taking action?" "The HOA's obligation was to the homeowner, Your Honor, not to the county." "The HOA's obligation is to its residents, counselor, and those residents benefit from functional emergency alert systems. Let me ask you directly. Are you aware of any attempt by HOA President Whitmore to contact county emergency management before ordering the internet line to be cut?" Bradley glanced at Deborah, who was staring straight ahead, her face carefully neutral. "Not to my knowledge, Your Honor." Judge Kowalski looked down at the documents in front of her, then back up. "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm granting the county's motion for a temporary restraining order. The HOA is hereby ordered to immediately cease any interference with the emergency alert system, to allow and cooperate with the reinstallation of Mr. Patterson's internet connection, to waive any fees or approval requirements for said installation, and to take no retaliatory action against Mr. Patterson for his role in maintaining the county system. This order is effective immediately and will remain in place pending a full hearing on the matter, which I'm scheduling for 30 days from now. We'll address the question of attorney's fees and any further relief at that time. She banged her gavel. Next case. We stood and Michelle shook my hand. That went about as well as it could have. Congratulations. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So Comcast can reinstall the line now? Absolutely. The HOA has to cooperate and they can't charge you any fees or fine you for it. Call them today and get it scheduled. Deborah stormed out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. Her lawyers packed up their briefcases with tight expressions, clearly unhappy with the outcome. I didn't care. I had my injunction and I could get my internet back. I called Comcast from the courthouse steps. With the court order in hand, they were suddenly much more helpful. They could have a crew out tomorrow to run a new line, they assured me. No charge for the installation since it was a restoration of existing service after vandalism. Yes, they'd run it aerial again unless I wanted to pay for underground, which I declined. The whole process would take about 2 hours. That night, the local news ran the story of the court hearing. Jennifer Cole stood outside the courthouse and reported that the judge had sided with the county and ordered the HOA to allow reinstallation of the emergency alert system's internet connection. She interviewed Michelle Rodriguez, who gave a soundbite about the importance of not interfering with public safety infrastructure. This case sends a clear message, Michelle said on camera. HOAs have legitimate authority to enforce community standards, but that authority has limits. You cannot endanger public safety in pursuit of aesthetic preferences. The court made the right decision today. The segment ended with another clip of Deborah's Facebook comment about internet being a luxury, creating a stark contrast between her position and the judge's ruling. The comment section on the news station's website was predictably brutal. The next morning, Comcast arrived right on schedule. 2 technicians spent about 90 minutes running a new fiber line from the utility pole to my house, connecting it to my equipment, and testing everything. By noon, I was back online with my full-speed connection, and the emergency alert system was purring along happily on its proper infrastructure. I called Carl to let him know. We're back up and running at full capacity. Thank God. That's great news, Sam. Listen, the county administrator wants to meet with you next week. They're talking about improving the backup systems for all the neighborhood hubs and possibly pursuing charges against the HOA for the interference. Charges, like criminal charges, potentially. Interfering with emergency communications systems can be a criminal offense under Colorado law. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case. Would that actually go anywhere? Hard to say. Probably depends on whether the DA thinks they can prove criminal intent versus just stupidity. But either way, the county wants to make sure this never happens again. The neighborhood petition to recall Deborah reached 250 signatures, and the HOA bylaws required the board to schedule a recall vote within 30 days. They scheduled it for the maximum allowed time, clearly hoping that emotions would cool and support for Deborah would recover. It didn't work. If anything, people got angrier as the details of the case spread. Someone obtained the HOA's legal bills through a public records request and discovered that Deborah had spent over $15,000 in HOA funds fighting the county's motion. That money came from residents' HOA fees, and people were furious that their dues were being used to defend cutting an emergency alert system. An organized opposition group formed, calling themselves Residents for Responsible HOA Management. They created a website, held community meetings, and put together a slate of candidates to run for the HOA board in the next regular election. The movement was gaining serious momentum. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I received a certified letter from the district attorney's office. They were opening a criminal investigation into potential interference with emergency communications systems and wanted to interview me. I called the number on the letter and spoke with an assistant district attorney named Robert Chen. "Mr. Patterson, we've reviewed the case file from the county attorney's office and the court proceedings," Robert said. "We believe there may be grounds for criminal charges under Colorado Revised Statutes Section 18-9-111, which prohibits interference with emergency telephone systems and emergency communications. We'd like to get your full statement on the record. What kind of charges are we talking about? If we proceed, it would likely be a misdemeanor interference charge, possibly upgraded to a felony if we can demonstrate that the interference created a substantial risk of serious bodily injury. Given the delayed emergency alerts during an active severe weather event, we think we have a case for the enhanced charge." I gave my statement to Robert and an investigator over the course of 2 hours, walking through every detail of the incident. They were particularly interested in my conversations with Deborah, both on the phone and in person, and the fact that I'd explicitly warned her and the maintenance crew about the emergency alert system before the line was cut. Did Miss Whitmore ever acknowledge understanding that cutting the line would affect emergency communications? Robert asked. Yes. When I told her on the phone, she said it was unfortunate timing, but that I should have made alternative arrangements. When she came to my house after, she said the county would figure out an alternative solution and that it wasn't her problem. Robert and the investigator exchanged looks. She actually said that it wasn't her problem, word for word. I remember it clearly because I was so shocked that anyone would be that cavalier about emergency services. They thanked me for my time and said they'd be in touch. 2 days later, I learned through the community grapevine that investigators had interviewed Deborah and several board members. The neighborhood Facebook group was ablaze with speculation about potential charges. The recall vote was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center. I arrived early and found the parking lot already half full. Inside, the main room was set up with chairs facing a small stage and a table near the entrance where residents could sign in and verify their eligibility to vote. The tension was palpable. I signed in and took a seat near the middle. Neighbors kept approaching me to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the HOA. Several people apologized for not taking the cable violation more seriously when it first happened. A few admitted they'd initially thought I was overreacting, but had changed their minds after the delayed storm alerts. Deborah arrived with her lawyer, Bradley Hunt, and they sat in the front row looking grim. The HOA board members trickled in, most of them looking uncomfortable. Roger Feldman, the former president who had approved my hosting of the emergency alert system, came over to talk to me. "Sam, I'm sorry about all of this," he said. "I never imagined Deborah would do something so reckless when I handed over the presidency. I thought she'd just focus on enforcing the paint color rules, maybe crack down on messy lawns. This is insane." "Why didn't you run for re-election?" Roger sighed. "I was burned out. 5 years as HOA president, dealing with petty complaints and neighbor disputes, it wore me down. I wanted a break." In hindsight, I should have stuck around. The meeting was called to order at 7 o'clock. The board secretary, a nervous woman named Patricia Moore, read the recall petition and confirmed that it had sufficient signatures to proceed. She explained the voting process. Residents would cast ballots either to retain Deborah as president or to recall her. If the recall succeeded, the board would hold an emergency election to fill the position. Deborah was given an opportunity to speak in her defense. She walked to the podium, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I understand that many of you are upset about the events of recent weeks," she began. "I want you to know that every decision I made was in what I believe to be the best interests of our community. Property values, community standards, these things matter. They're why we all chose to live in Pinecrest Hills. When I saw violations of our guidelines, I felt obligated to enforce them, regardless of who was committing the violation or what excuses they offered." Someone in the back shouted, "Emergency alerts aren't an excuse." Deborah's jaw tightened. I was not aware at the time that the internet connection was as critical as Mr. Patterson claimed. I believed he was exaggerating to avoid compliance. I now understand that I should have investigated further before taking action. However, I maintain that the HOA's authority to enforce community standards is essential, and I will not apologize for taking that authority seriously. The room erupted in boos and angry shouts. Patricia had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. When the noise died down, Deborah continued, but her voice had lost its confidence. "I ask you to consider the broader implications of this recall. If a board president can be removed simply for enforcing the rules, then our entire system of governance becomes meaningless. Anyone who doesn't like a decision can organize a recall, and we'll have chaos. I made a mistake in how I handled one specific situation, but that doesn't mean I should be removed from office." She sat down to scattered applause from a handful of supporters, drowned out by silence from the majority of the room. Then the floor was opened for general comments. A dozen residents lined up to speak, and nearly all of them called for Deborah's removal. They talked about the delayed storm warnings, about the wasted HOA funds on legal fees, about the embarrassment of seeing their neighborhood on the news for interfering with emergency services. One man spoke about how his disabled mother hadn't received the severe weather alert in time and had been caught outside in the hail, suffering minor injuries. "My mother could have been seriously hurt," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "All because you thought a cable was ugly. That's unacceptable. You have to go." The voting lasted 30 minutes. Ballots were collected and counted by Patricia and two other board members serving as tellers. The room waited in tense silence, broken only by whispered conversations. Finally, Patricia returned to the podium. "The votes have been counted and verified. 243 ballots were cast. To recall President Whitmore, we needed a simple majority. The results are 198 votes in favor of recall, 45 votes against." The room exploded in applause. Deborah stood, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both, and walked out without a word. Bradley Hunt followed her, his briefcase clutched tight. I watched them go, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This whole situation had been so unnecessary. The board immediately convened an emergency meeting to discuss appointing an interim president. Roger Feldman was drafted back into service, accepting with obvious reluctance. His first act was to apologize to me publicly and to assure the community that there would be no further interference with the emergency alert system. "We will be reviewing all of our enforcement policies," Roger announced, to ensure we have appropriate exceptions and processes for situations involving public safety or county infrastructure. This should never have happened, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I left the meeting feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The nightmare was essentially over. My internet was restored. The emergency alert system was fully functional. Deborah was out as HOA president, and the community had rallied behind doing the right thing. A week later, Robert Chen called me with an update on the criminal investigation. "We've decided to file charges," he said. Deborah Whitmore will be charged with 1 count of interference with emergency communications, a Class 1 misdemeanor, and 1 count of reckless endangerment, a Class 3 misdemeanor. Given the circumstances, we're also charging the maintenance supervisor, Dennis Morton, as an accessory, though we'll likely offer him a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. When will this happen? The charges will be filed tomorrow, and she'll be served with a summons to appear in court. This won't be a trial for a while, probably several months out, but I wanted to give you advance notice. You'll likely be called as a witness. I'll be there. The news that Deborah was being criminally charged spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The reaction was mixed. Most people felt it was justified, that there needed to be consequences for endangering public safety. A vocal minority thought it was excessive, that criminal charges were too harsh for what was essentially a civil dispute. I tried to stay out of the debate. I'd done what I needed to do, protect the emergency alert system and ensure it could function properly. What happened to Deborah legally was between her and the district attorney's office. The court case played out over the next several months. Deborah initially pleaded not guilty and indicated she wanted to fight the charges. Her lawyer argued that she hadn't intended to interfere with emergency communications, that she was simply enforcing HOA rules and couldn't be held criminally liable for not understanding the technical implications of her actions. The prosecution countered that she'd been explicitly warned, multiple times, that cutting the line would affect emergency alerts, and that she'd proceeded anyway. Intent didn't require understanding all the technical details. It only required knowledge that the action would interfere with emergency communications and choosing to do it anyway. Dennis Morton, the maintenance supervisor, took a plea deal early on. He pled guilty to a reduced charge of negligent interference in exchange for probation and his testimony against Deborah. He told the court that Deborah had ordered him to proceed with cutting the line even after he'd informed her about my objections regarding the emergency system. She told me the county had no authority over HOA enforcement, Dennis testified. She said if Mr. Patterson had a problem, he could take it up with the county, but we were going to do our job. That testimony was damaging. It showed Deborah had been aware of the emergency system issue and had consciously chosen to prioritize HOA enforcement over emergency communications. Her lawyer tried to rehabilitate her on cross-examination, getting her to testify that she truly believed the county would be able to maintain emergency services through alternative means, but it didn't help much. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on day 2, walking the jury through the emergency alert system, how it functioned, what happened when the line was cut, and the delayed notifications during the thunderstorm. I showed them the documentation of notification times, the screenshots of the struggling cellular connection, and the video I'd taken of the maintenance crew cutting the line despite my objections. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on both charges. Deborah sat stone-faced as the verdicts were read, but I saw her hands shaking. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a different one from Judge Kowalski who'd handled the civil case, gave Deborah a stern lecture about the responsibilities that come with positions of authority in a community. "Miss Whitmore, you were entrusted with leadership of your homeowners association, and with that came a duty to act responsibly and with regard for the welfare of your community," the judge said. "Instead, you prioritized aesthetic concerns over public safety, ignored explicit warnings about the consequences of your actions, and proceeded to interfere with emergency communications systems that protect hundreds of families. Your judgment was profoundly flawed, and the law requires consequences." He sentenced her to 90 days in jail, suspended with 1 year of probation. She was also fined $3,000, ordered to perform 200 hours of community service, and required to attend a program on community leadership and public safety. If she violated probation, she'd serve the jail time. It wasn't harsh as criminal sentences go, but it was enough. Deborah left the courtroom with her lawyer, and I never saw her again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she put her house up for sale shortly after sentencing and moved out of Pinecrest Hills entirely. The HOA held special elections for all board positions. Roger served as interim president until the elections, then gratefully stepped down. A slate of reform candidates won in a landslide, running on promises of reasonable enforcement, community engagement, and never, ever interfering with public safety infrastructure. The new board's first act was to pass a resolution formally apologizing to me and to the county for the interference with the emergency alert system. They also amended the community guidelines to include explicit exceptions for public safety equipment, emergency services, and county infrastructure. Any future enforcement actions involving such equipment would require board approval and consultation with relevant county authorities before proceeding. Comcast, as a gesture of goodwill and probably to avoid any potential liability, upgraded my internet connection to their highest residential tier at no additional charge. The emergency alert system now had more bandwidth than it could ever need. The County Emergency Management Office held a small ceremony recognizing my service and dedication to maintaining the system through extraordinary circumstances, which was their diplomatic way of saying dealing with that insane HOA situation. They also implemented new policies to better protect and support the volunteers who hosted neighborhood alert system hubs, including backup funding for alternate internet connections and legal support if any other HOA tried something similar. Life gradually returned to normal. I went back to my regular routine of software development and system monitoring. The emergency alerts went out as needed, quickly and efficiently, reaching all households within the target time frames. The system worked exactly as it was designed to. One evening about 6 months after everything had settled, I was sitting on my front porch when my new neighbor from across the street walked over. He'd moved into Deborah's old house a few weeks earlier, a friendly guy named Kevin with a wife and 2 young kids. "Hey, Sam," he said, "I wanted to ask you about something. When we were buying the house, the real estate agent mentioned that the previous owner had some kind of issue with the HOA. I didn't get all the details, but I wanted to know if there's something I should be worried about." I looked at the fiber optic cable running from the utility pole to my house, clearly visible against the afternoon sky, and smiled. "The previous owner had some strongly held opinions about community aesthetics," I said, "but the current board is much more reasonable. You'll be fine." Kevin nodded, looking relieved. "Good to know. By the way, my wife and I wanted to thank you for maintaining the emergency alert system. Our real estate agent mentioned you run it from your house." "That's really cool, and it's good to know the neighborhood has someone looking out for everyone's safety." just doing my part. Kevin headed back home, and I sat there as the sun set, watching the neighborhood wind down for the evening. Kids were called in from playing outside, porch lights flickered on, and the familiar sounds of a residential community settling in for the night filled the air. The whole experience had been stressful, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But it had also shown me something important about communities. When people understood what was really at stake, when they saw past the petty concerns and focused on what mattered, they generally made the right choice. It had taken time, and it had required standing up to unreasonable authority, but in the end, common sense and public safety had won out. My phone buzzed with a notification. Routine weather alert. Nothing serious, just informing residents about slightly elevated fire danger due to dry conditions. I watched the monitoring software push the alert out to all 312 households in under 90 seconds, a perfect execution of exactly what the system was designed to do. Somewhere out there, families were getting that notification, staying informed, staying safe. And they were getting it because the community had decided that safety mattered more than aesthetics, that protecting people was more important than perfectly manicured appearances. I went inside, made dinner, and checked the system one more time before bed. Everything was running smoothly, all indicators green, all connections solid. The neighborhood was safe, the emergency infrastructure was intact, and tomorrow I'd get up and do it all again. That was the real victory, I realized. Not the court case, not the recall vote, not even the criminal conviction. The real victory was that the system worked. When people needed warnings, they got them. When emergencies happened, the community was prepared. Everything else was just the messy process of getting there. The internet line that had caused so much trouble hung outside my window, a thin black cable carrying data and emergency alerts to hundreds of homes. To Deborah, it had been an eyesore, a violation of aesthetic standards. To me, and eventually to the whole community, it was something different, a lifeline, a connection, a tool for keeping people safe. Sometimes the most important things aren't the prettiest. Sometimes function matters more than form. And sometimes, when someone tries to cut your literal lifeline in the name of appearances, you have to stand up and fight back, not just for yourself, but for everyone who depends on you. I'd done that. The community had backed me up. The courts had agreed. The system was safe. That night, I slept better than I had in months, knowing that if a tornado warning came through at 3 in the morning, every household in Pinecrest Hills would know about it within 2 minutes. The emergency alert system would do its job, the job it was designed for, without interference or obstruction. And that ugly black cable running to my house would keep right on doing its beautiful work, keeping my neighbors safe, one alert at a time.